Yes, and we are back, finally, with another content-minded episode. An amazing, what is it, episode 60? Am I correct about that? Yes, it's episode 60, and for those who don't know, last episode had an amazing discussion, almost 4 hours long, the whole thing. The whole thing's on Patreon and Substack, with Gabe Underground from the Sidebar Podcast, one of the best underground, less known literature podcasts, where the three of them, they cover literature from this thing of ours. I highly recommend. They're quite entertaining, especially Gabe. And we talk about Fish Tank Live. We talk about a bunch of other things. But I figure episode 60 is a milestone. And that's why this episode we will be covering some very, meaningful things. I hesitate to say serious. They are serious, a lot of them. But there's some silly stuff as well. Not silly, but, fun. I guess fun. And, this will be a philosophy show, and we will cover mostly matters of different philosophy, whether it becomes, I don't want it to become just another drama stream, but I'll cover in the public portion some great stuff about, of course, art and music. This one essay I came across by an anon about nu metal, which is really crazy. But I wanted to begin with a discussion of Heidegger and his notion of the event, because our good friend Thomas777 T777 posted something about it. It's just one tweet in a little thread where he's recommending different books. Because I noticed that a lot of people, they're fascinated with Cole. And it's like, I want to get, I feel like I'm a hypocrite. I feel like I'm a hypocrite if I don't focus on higher things. Now, some people can say that I am a hypocrite because this podcast, in the middle of it, will be covering a thread by our favorite radical feminist, the TERF from the Hollow Earth. You know who she is. I can't say her full name on YouTube, but I'm just going to say RFH. And people are like, oh my God, Gio, I can't believe you're taking RFH seriously. I think that RFH is a humor account, and she's always been good to me, and she always, denied certain allegations. But anyways, it's a good tweet. It's a good long post, a semi-long post that she did on the nature of male energy that I will also include some criticisms of that people have informed me of. And so I promised that I would cover it on the show. And, I promise, listen, bracket your opinion on that particular poster. It's going to be a good post, okay? Because it's going to go with my whole, this morning I woke up and I planned to do a workout. And I did do a pretty good workout. I'm aiming for at least 3 good hour-long weightlifting workouts a week, different groups, and then in between I will go for walks. I think that's because I want to stay away from the row and ride a bit. I pulled a muscle in my back going really hard. It was really an emotional thing, but also people debate over, I guess this is the call about gyms and exercise, but I'll get to the core that people enjoy. But I noticed that there's this debate between steady state cardio and what do they call it? Intermittent impact cardio, something like that. It's like that grifter you see on YouTube, V-Shred, whatever. Apparently, it's this kind of grift. Because I've been watching this guy on YouTube. I think his channel's called Renaissance Hypertrophy, Dr. Mike. Because I know that Ethan Suplee, I believe me and Ethan Suplee, the actor, he lost a ton of weight. I believe we're mutuals on Twitter. But he recommends him because he watched this TED Talk that he did more than a few years ago, Dr. Mike. And, he really does have a lot of practical advice. As much as I'm enamored by a lot of the bro science stuff, there is, legit science to, a lot of stuff when it comes to health and fitness. Of course, the diet thing is something I've struggled with my whole life that I'm trying to get better on. I've committed myself for the past few years to get better on. But now that I'm sort of at the point where my fitness level, I can handle weightlifting. Not a lot of weight because I'm building up to it. But today I really cooked my legs and my lower back and my mid back with a lot of, squats, deadlifts, hammer curls. Not hammer curls, the opposite, where you mimic a core, like a cable machine with dumbbells, a lot of like really flexing, like having a lot of flexion of the lower back. It's very good. And I'm really glad that I did invest. It wasn't that much investment with all the weights and with what I got for a barbell and a squat bench, not a squat, what they call it, a bench press. And so I really have been, consuming some of this content. And there is a lot of scientific evidence to, not doing as much reps with as much weight and really controlling each rep and really getting that hypertrophy on the lower end of the eccentric. And so I'm very cautious of controlling each movement because, of course, I don't want to cook my own, so hard that my joints are messed up because I'm already carrying a lot of weight. So, but, I'm approaching normiedom when it comes to exercise. I'm not there yet, of course. But before, when I used to lift weights, I was totally cooked. I would have to stop for more than a few days. I was out of it. Couldn't do anything. But now that I can walk more, I have insoles, and I'm trying to like really, I want to get to where, maybe I can go to a gym and not being embarrassed to, use a lot of different leg machines because, you have to combine things, I noticed, with fitness. Like Dr. Ray Pete had that observation that my good friend, she was on the show, my good friend Dino World, said, if you really want to lose weight, you got to work out the lower body, the core, the legs. That is the most metabolic area, right? I mean, the arms too, but anyways. I'm, of course, a novice, and so, but I've been focusing on that lately, and hopefully it becomes just like a routine thing, like taking a shower, brushing your teeth sort of thing. But I do like the feeling of lifting weights. I do enjoy that positive feeling of fatigue at the end of a workout. And but anyways, you people, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people, it's just this call about mids and 7 out of 10 and Zendaya and this Dune movie. And last week, at the time of recording, they were talking about Ayala doing unspeakable things and writing about it. And really, you should not speak the demon's name. You shouldn't even say her name. And I said, I replied to my friend Bennett, our a good friend Bennett Demelich. Like, with all due respect, like, I think we should just not. I know I'm being a hypocrite. It's like, in order to warn you, I have to stare into the abyss. But you really should just not focus on these people. They're not worthy of your time. None of those people are, really. And in the paywalled version, which I don't know if I'll release, I'll probably release as a content-minded extra, I really go off on Bonania and the whole thing about his own version of basic, like, unironic liberalism with more of a racism bent. And I really go off on his opinion on the Vlad interview. And I don't know if you people are interested in that, because the paywalled version of this episode, I want to get into conscious and guided human evolution. And I want to read and review, maybe not the whole thing, maybe probably the whole thing. That'll take probably over an hour. The essay from Land's Fang Numina, Papa Land's Fang Numina, called Machinic Desire. And it's a very complicated chapter, and you need someone such as myself, who is familiar with Deleuze and Guattari, who is familiar with at least a little bit with Kant. I mean, I took grad courses on Kantianism, but I'm not an expert in Kant. I don't focus on Kant that much. I mean, I still have to brush up. Sometimes when I talk about his aesthetic theory, I still have to go to the Oxford Encyclopedia, and I still have to brush. You always have to do that, even if you're a thinker who has his or her own ideas. You still have to brush up on basic concepts, and there's no shame in it. So even if you have to go to academia.edu and you type in or JSTOR, if you have access, or if you know certain tricks around Sci-Hub. Or did I say that? Then you could find basic explainers to these complex philosophical concepts. Of course, I do believe John David Ebert, he may still have videos on Kant up on his YouTube, and I think that he took a trip recently. Was it to Egypt or Peru or somewhere, where he's explaining the artwork, and it really would be a dream come true still. I know the allegations against him, but John David Ebert, now that I'm in the stage of editing the book, and here's a book update, I'll get to a book update. Here I really do owe him a debt in terms of my own intellectual development, especially around the work of art. So anyways, yeah, you people, you love this Cole. I don't know, this mid-discourse, Sydney Sweeney's a Pennsylvania 7, and Zendaya, and it's like, stop it, okay? I haven't watched the Dune movies, by the way. I haven't read the books. I'm not really that big into sci-fi. Certain sci-fi I am, but I'm not acquainted with the lore of Dune. Maybe I should be. Maybe that's a failure on my part. I'm not a big, fiction reader. I should improve on that. There's certain books I want to read, such as A Coin in Nine Hands. I want to finish The Blind Owl and do a review for Apocalypse Confidential on it. There's certain fiction works I want to read that I'm interested in. I'm almost done reading House of Leaves. I have to pick that up because I want to do a Content-Minded episode, Jay Burden. That's one of his favorite books. And maybe we could also talk about Ignatius J. Riley from A Confederacy of Dunces. And in the future, and there's a lot of other works. I know that Telos Bound wanted me to read The Tragedy of Philosophy, which I do have by Bulgakov. Is that how you pronounce his name? Bulgakov. There you go. And but all you really focus on these really trivial things about celebrities and if she's attractive, and it's like really high school level tier stuff. And I feel like I have to cut through all of that. And it's been, oh my God, 12 minutes of the introduction. I saw this post by some rad femme, and I posted on Telegram. And please follow my Telegram, telegram.com/generateproductions. I said, there's a form of bitterness that in a lot of femcel and incel and red pill manosphere, quote unquote. And it's funny because I'm actually recording an episode with an OG pickup artist with Kathrine for the computer room. And maybe we'll get into this stuff, but there's a lot of bitterness and resentment. When you can tell when someone's bitter? It's funny because this post, it's like this, I don't even want to say the name of this person because honestly, you'll see, a lot of these rad femmes, they have Korean or Asian profile pictures, and it's a lot of hideous emptiness, really. And a lot of incels that post that aren't particularly poetic, they're sort of posting into the void about their own, And here's the thing, I come at this from a place of love because I don't condemn incels or femcels. But I do condemn a lot of sort of ideological fetishism around a lot of very genuine issues. Now there's this post by this rad femme poster, and this is what I said. It's people, they don't like RFH, but RFH, if you actually examine, if you can cut through the anti-man stuff, which I think a lot of it's performative, maybe I'll interview her one day. Maybe, would you like that? I mean, hey, I'm not being a hypocrite. That other guy interviewed her, and he didn't get any flack, and he's the top capo of a certain faction of the right. But whatever. He got nuked on Twitter recently, so not that I agree with that. Listen, as much as I don't like Meg Gold, I don't agree with him getting nuked off of Twitter. I do not agree with that. Hopefully he comes back. They reinstate his account, even though we're mutually blocked. But I'm not going to do the whole RAP bozo, even though I have substantial disagreements with him, and he certainly doesn't like me and whatever. I don't know. It's that's... Maybe I shouldn't be this honest in public. But anyways, if you can get past the anti-man stuff, which a lot of it kind of is performative, she does have some, very genuine insights. And she has a very, I think, Gnostic, divine feminine worldview going on, which has some elements of Christianity. And it's kind of interesting from an intellectual perspective. And it's there's something there. You could tell RFH has something that a lot of these other rad femmes don't, which is the joy of posting. And because she enmeshed herself with the online right for so long, I think that she has that sense of the joy of posting, right? Now you could say, oh yes, there's bitterness. Is there projection? Is she attacking her ex? Implicitly, okay, yes, fine, whatever. But there is something there. Whereas this post, I think it was about like, how do you say it? It's like about, the crisis of male loneliness, how like women were lonely forever, and it's only when men that there's all these experts and so forth. Now, a lot of that focus on the crisis of male loneliness, a lot of it's negative. A lot of it comes from like academic feminists that talk about how they're dangerous and that incels are, and this is why I will never insult anyone for being an incel, because a lot of it is what I've said this for years now, a lot of it's a biopolitical category, meaning that it is subject to certain forms of knowledge creation, certain forms of surveillance and discipline, and discourses around criminality and malfeasance and so forth, and you could easily apply that. I remember when I was in a grad seminar one time about Foucault, I remember there was this older woman who was in her seminar, in her class, and she was a domestic, you-know-what, shelter worker. And this is when I was more naive, right? This is when I was like more caught up, I think, in a lot of the more ideological stuff about the manosphere. To myself, I remember going like, oh my God, okay, here we go, right? But she was talking about the new Scandinavian-style laws around quote-unquote X work in Canada, where basically if you're a John, if you're paying for it, you can be persecuted, but you're not going to be persecuted for selling. And a lot of people say that, well, there are these laws to protect women, blah, blah, blah. And I definitely believe in protecting, people that are caught up in this line of work. I think that, but then she said something very interesting, which informed my thinking about it, or it made me think in a new way about it, which she said that we're basically applying Foucauldian biopolitics to now a new class of male perpetrators that become victims of the system. And she goes, it's very funny that way, how we still haven't addressed the issue. We've just slanted it towards the other side. Now, do I believe that people should go to jail for buying or selling? No. But I think that Marx, and even like Thomas Aquinas famously talked about this, how there will always be people, and that's probably better than the other forms of onanism that are in society. There's always going to be people that will debase themselves, but should it be illegal? Totally. First of all, I don't think you can make it totally illegal, but that's not to say that you can't make things illegal just because you can't expunge it through law. But at the same time, it's something that's very difficult to talk about. It's very difficult to persecute. And I think that it's tragic, a lot of women and men who go into X work, but also it's kind of tragic for people that buy such things. Not all of them are abusive or whatever. I mean, a lot of them are. Yes, it's true. But I think that it's very interesting, our framing of that, and how we're sort of reversing it. Now, would I personally... I think that there obviously is something wrong when you have to go to that length of paying for it. But at the same time, the ease and availability of such content virtually, that is in some ways more destructive than a very, very ancient form of maladaptive behavior, which is paying for X. Whereas nowadays, we're so pronified that it's everywhere. But anyways, my point being is that, so a lot of it's negative, the attention to the male loneliness crisis. Maybe we can talk about X work another time. I've talked about it all the way back in the Follow the Rules days. But a lot of that post comes from a place of, I think, genuine emotion and sentiment, genuine anger. A lot of women throughout the aeons have experienced loneliness and have experienced social silencing and so forth. But I will say that to the point of the manosphere or to the incels, whatever you want to call them, because oftentimes they're different, that when it comes to male loneliness, there's a particular form of social bracketing, because men by definition can't be lonely or they can't express it. And I don't think the answer is the sort of pop feminist of the 2010s where they're like, well, men can just, they have to be, you know, they can cry and they can express their feelings. It's not that men don't want to express their feelings, just that we're, you know, wired differently to express feelings. We're wired differently, and overt displays of emotivism maybe doesn't really address the issue of purposelessness. So I will meet this radfem halfway and say that there has been periods in history, even up until the modern world, depending where you are, where yes, female loneliness has been neglected. But that doesn't mean that the experts and the media coverage and the talking and the discourse around male loneliness is inherently positive, or that men can, there's like this perception of bias towards men. A lot of it's negative. A lot of it is men are lonely because, and it's bad because they're all inherently criminal and they're all inherently misogynist and therefore ergo, or other things that I can't name on YouTube. And it's so, that assumption is wrong. It's like saying the incels about like, you know, all women, they can find perfect joy and happiness. They just have to go out there and find a random man. And it's like, that's not really it. Right? It's, when it comes to femcells, there's a different form of loneliness as well. It's similar, but there's different conditions there, right? And it's not that a lot of women are choosy, right? I know I'm like being painfully centrist here. A lot of women are choosy. A lot of women will, and there's like these very cruel posts I notice that are happening right now where they take stock photos of like average schlubby men and they're like, why would I want to date this? A lot of women will settle. A lot of women won't. And a lot of women are choosy. And a lot of guys are choosy as well. And I notice there is a particular viciousness when it comes to unattractive men. But at the same time, there is a lot of like femcells and lonely women. It's not that they are picky per se. It's just that they don't want men to hurt them. And they've often had very negative experiences with certain men. And it's a complicated issue. And this is why I think the coal posting around the radfem sphere and the red pill manosphere people and all these like anonymous masculinity grifters selling programs and all these like radfems that are like worshiping the self-extinction, voluntary extinction movement in Korea with the Korean radfems. It's like a lot of this, I feel. Now, I don't know. I don't have evidence for this. You can never truly have evidence for this about the way the sausage is made. It's kind of like a certain dog avatar when it comes to certain wholesome Chungus nation in Eastern Europe, right? You can never really get unless you have someone exposing it from the inside, you can never really know. Although that is probably easier to link to certain, let's call them bioluminescent activities. You can never truly link the bioluminescent activity of a lot of this type of posting that is specifically engineered. I believe this tweet had like 39,000 or 50,000 likes, and you can never really gauge if it's being botted, if it's being boosted on Reddit, or if there's some kind of, let's call it bioluminescent activity going on when it comes to promoting certain very harmful discourses, not just to like harmful as in men or women, but as I've said in the Telegram post, telegram.com/genderproductions, it's harmful to one's soul to consume this type of lurid, very incredibly negative content without any nuance whatsoever, especially when it comes to things that are very close and very personal to every living human being. No matter what gender you define yourself as or what proclivity you have, the relations between men, women, sexuality is something very deep and very primordial. And this is why that gets so much engagement, so much bait posting. And I don't know if there's some kind of nefariousness behind both spheres. If there is some kind of bioluminescent activity, or if you don't even have to be as conspiratorial and mechanical over it, you can say that these discourses naturally develop and people naturally are baited by this type of engagement because it's so inherently instinctual and primordial and very deep to the human experience, which is the relation to the other. So in that sense, you can't be totally conspiratorial, but is it beyond the realm of imagination that there can be some kind of, maybe not the posters themselves knowing it, by the way, but there's a reason why algorithms boost certain content related to the war between the X's, if you know what I mean. You got to really question yourself there. And why is this bait so effective? There's a whole psychology behind it that really tug on the heartstrings of both men and women, or whatever in between. And a lot of it comes from a place of pain and bitterness and shame and so forth. And I've certainly been through it. But I wonder if it really is destructive to the human soul. If you are a man or a woman or a girl or whatever, a boy, a sensitive young man, sensitive young woman, and you're really trying to navigate life, and then you see this content, which is specifically designed to demoralize you. And it's a form of a participatory humiliation ritual that probably is organic, but probably maybe isn't organic. And you have to really question that. So I think you have to have a form of psychic shielding. You have to get rid of what Matthew the Stout called psychic pollution. And that leads into the book update of this introduction or portion of the show. So yes, the book is currently getting edited, but instead of just sending it off and having revisions and so forth, my good friend, our good friend, whom I've known for many years, Matthew the Stout, who is very good at the written word, because, you know, the British education system is even that above America and Canada. He's going through it with me, and it's probably going to take like maybe a month or 2 months even. We're going through it line by line, or he'll have basic grammatical revisions, and on like we're doing it live. We're doing it live. We're editing the book, and he comes up with great things to change around in terms of continuity and sentence structure, and even just things that sound better. And of course, I come up with ideas and words, and I explain concepts to him. And it's good because he knows already a lot of the different concepts, and I can explain it to him, and he gets it as an artist. And of course, certain sections we've tackled before on Style Talks, which hopefully will come back when he has time, when his new studio is updated. And we've gone through, and it's really been productive. And I think that when I choose to, maybe in a few years, maybe even less than that, write another book, which will be on different outsider artists that appeal to the dissident sphere. I have a short list of people. Of course, the top being Young, did Kumira Swami do that? No, Nikolai Roerich, of course, Rudolf Steiner, Jonathan Bowden, and I'm thinking of a few others. I mean, there's this one article I saw years ago on this blog. Like, do you remember blog.com, whatever it was called, Blogspot? I still have the article, but it was about comparing the different perennialists and like mystic writers that did visual art. And I think one of them was Fritjof Schuon, who actually was quite a very competent painter. Although some of the stuff he did in that reservation, where was it? Wyoming, or it was in Indiana, Wyoming, somewhere. Well, let's not get into it. But then he compared it to Young and Crowley, and of course, Nikolai Roerich. And of course, Nikolai Roerich was an actual trained artist. So I always had this idea mulling in my head for many years, since I was like before grad school. When I was like even an undergrad, where I'm like, well, I want to write a book about mystics or perennialists who are also artists. And I think I could do some outsider schizos as well. Maybe I'll write about King Salmonfish. Maybe I'll write about... I'm trying to think of like who fits the bill. There was that one, what was his name? Hampton in Harlem, where he like created this whole religion, this like perennialist religion. He made these shrines out of junk. I think it probably won't fit the vibe with, with the dissident right. But there are many artists that I've come across who are doing things like photo editing and digital art. And I may include Nobody TM in that book as well. That would probably be a collection of essays that I write over time, and would probably exceed the page limit of even my current book. So that's an editing update. But other than that, yeah, psychic pollution is a concept that me and Matthew really come back to a lot. Like, they're talking again, because this Dune movie, they're talking about Zendaya and Sydney Sweeney and all this, I don't know, you got to get over this whole mid thing. You have to get over this. It's not good, right? So, I think I will ramble for a bit about some things, then I will have a break and we'll come back to Ereignis, or the event as Heidegger understood. So I really want this to be more of a meaningful philosophy and art episode, because it is episode 60, but anyways, that's Insider Baseball. So 2 things that are kind of discourse or cool topics, whatever. One being this tweet I saw by some YIMBY. I remember a few days ago I kept seeing this YIMBY content. For those who don't know, it means yes in my backyard. It's like these urban development people that are, a lot of them are basically just the most vindictive and spiteful libs you've ever seen. They want to destroy ruralites. They want to basically force everyone into an urban nightmare. I know I'm being polemical. There are some who are actually quite good that can suggest how, cities can become more livable and so forth. But a lot of them are unironically like live in the pod, eat the bugs type of people. And this one person said that what's his name? Some like with 100,000 followers. So I guess I'm not casting too much shade of someone with that following. The transit guy, Hayden Clarkin. What a name, Clarkin. If you're wondering why we are a once-in-a-lifetime housing crisis, it's because older homeowners, boomers, who bought their houses for a few blueberries, do this at nearly every public meeting on a new housing in the country. So it's basically a room full of boomers in a city council meeting who don't want their property, their neighborhoods being turned into the one global giga longhouse favela. And then this really reveals, I think, a lot of where the real intention behind a lot of leftist rage is. It's not against the corporations that make things impossible. It's not against politicians that have destroyed the futures of millennials and now Zoomers and some Gen Xers. It's none of that. And we know, listen, we're all accustomed to bashing the boomers, but you can't say that the boomers are, like, okay, the boomers are uniquely responsible because we all know the real issue, which is immigration. The boomers are responsible for this, of course, yes. But when it comes to the real world consequences, do you want your neighborhoods being transformed in such a way? And listen, I'm all for helping homeless people, and I believe that there should be levels of smaller apartments and subsidized housing to an extent, although a lot of people abuse it, and that's a larger issue. But what these people want total open borders insanity. They want basically the Canada model of Justin Trudeau, which is totally unsustainable and will lead to basically a South Africa type of situation. Because you have to realize a lot of people, this is what they'll never tell you in the media, by the way. But you could go to my good friend Conscious Karakol and Robert Duden, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. That really, people there that are willing to tell the truth, which is when that system, I don't know if I could say it on YouTube, ended, the one starts with an A and with Artide. When that system ended, you had huge amounts of immigration from Congo, from elsewhere, from all across the bordering nations with South Africa. A lot of the tribes of, indigenous black people that grew up under that system in South Africa, they were also, especially, like, for example, the Zulus that owned a lot of property and so forth, they were also displaced because of the system. It descended into anarchy under the African National Congress. And that's really a tragedy, right? So this is, maybe we're a bit away from that, but you never know. So and this became a viral tweet, and this is what my good friend, American Barlam, said, who's a follower of mine for many years. These are probably 30 or 40 million illegals in this country whom we neither need nor wanted. And the idea that we should presume their presence as a gravitational mass around which everything else must be warped is risible. And really, I think that, at least in North America, that is the leftist project. Is that it should never stop. And a lot of them will say they're just, especially in Britain, they're just coming out and saying, well, it's revenge for whatever system of grievance and historic injustices and so forth, you want all the bit. But it's really funny how the question of urban, and this isn't a sort of like anti-immigration screed, but the sort of problem with the YIMBYs is that the aim is just a Motte and Bailey. I know that Discourse loves using the term Motte and Bailey. The aim is really this. It's the ignorance of the fact that it will turn whole urban centers into substandard places and borderline unlivable. But they don't really care about that, or they don't admit that that's real. And of course, it's very popular to blame the boomers, and the boomers have every right to shelter the blame for our current situation. But when it comes to this issue in particular, when it comes to people that generally don't want their communities to be turned into the problems that are faced with the slaughtering of the cities, it's not really the mismanagement. It's in blaming these individual people. It's not the mismanagement of elites or corporations or so forth. And the aim of YIMBYs is not even to remedy a lot of the problems with urban development. It's a very spiteful and vindictive thing. But they can't admit to that because they think that this is going to solve problems and that basically humans can live in pod cities and so forth, and it's perfectly fine. It's like, what about Japan? Oh, of course these people hate Japan, though, because Japan is xenophobic, and for some reason, a lot of like the lib radfems, not the real, the radfems that know what they're talking about, who have some kind of authenticity, but there's a lot of these like very like left liberal radfems that they think that like Japan is uniquely terrible towards women, and Japan does have a lot of problems with women. I'm not saying that, but they're like, oh, in Japanese cities, like you can't be a woman, blah, blah, blah. And they, they dredge up that one terrible case that happened in the 80s. You know the one. What was her name? Junko? And I saw this viral tweet. This was like a month ago. And it's like periodically there's a few things. There's that viral tweet about Junko. There's my certain identity group was never named in the Bible. That's a viral tweet. There's another viral tweet about like the right can't do art. Like there's a series of periodic Reddit, TikTok viral tweets that go into the social media coal cycle of the liberal left. And really, they hate Japan. They have this intense Japanophobia, the way that they hate Russia, for example. And it's really quite startling to see this. Because Japan is an example of having very close, dense urban development, but having social order, having clean cities, having all of the dreams of the YIMBYs without one crucial thing, which is the end result of their political project. Right? You know what I'm talking about. So you have to really go past what they mean and what they actually mean. The rhetoric of the YIMBY is this like universal humanitarianism and this we have to help our fellow man and so forth. But the end result is always something much more vindictive and cruel and destructive. And so this is why every time you see the most deranged tweets about crushing ruralites and about the that one book that came out recently about white rural rage and all this stuff, it's always YIMBYs. It's always like soy hipsters that love their... they're not even real hipsters, by the way. They're soy egalitarians. The genuine hipster actually does preserve culture. Not the soy egalitarian. The soy egalitarian is a mindless consumer, but also has these very, funny sounding concepts. And all these people were like, oh yeah, those people are evil and they're the ones that are the problem. Not the corporations, not the, mismanagement and so forth. And so, but the thing is, when it comes to helping people that are in need in our countries, that's a different issue. But, people were pointing this out. But it's like, why don't you blame the government or the banks? You're blaming, like, people that don't want their cities being slaughtered, right? Like, it's quite fascinating. But anyways, there's another tweet that happened where it was about this historian going off, where it's like saying about like, oh, this is fascist, that the aesthetics are fascist, and this type of stuff. And did they go private? I think they went private. Anyways, it's quite funny. It's quite funny, these people. And my good friend Lunkhead, who's a mutual of mine, you should follow him, Lunkhead, at Antweegonus, A-N-T-W-E-E Gonus, G-O-N-U-S, says there's something really contemptible at these shrill scolds who become historians for apparently no other reason than to constantly try to suck all possible fun and joy out of history and eternally henpeck anyone who sees the past as anything other than a benign dystopia. And then he says, you know, what really was important, of course, he got a Soy Jack meme, what really is important is not great men of history, but rather what's really important is, what did he say? Because I believe this person went private, so you can't see it. What really is important is like this helper, this domestic helper woman had a grocery list, and isn't that important? Those are the people that really built empire. I remember when I took history in undergrad, it's like, don't those people, they're the ones that really moved history, not the great men of history. No way, right? It's that's fascism. In the colonization of history and classics, I was talking about this actually with my GF because she's in classics, and it's like, yeah, it's quite funny how you have to destroy. There's this one guy here in Canada, I forget his name, but he's like some like self-hating white liberal. I forget his name. You probably know who he is, but I remember this was a year or 2 years ago. This was during Clownvid. He kept having these tweets about how, about Canada's evil and stuff like that. And it's very funny how these people that deeply hate the past, they are the ones who get ahead in academic history departments. And that basically it's to ensure the ideology. It's not, and they would say, oh, it's about I have a love of the past. I have a love of real history. But it's never a love of real history. It's always a contempt for it. It's a contempt for the cyclical nature of history, the way it was laid out by classic historians, such as Arnold Toynbee and so forth. That history is driven by these great men, by great people. Some of them were great women. And that, the common man has such a little effect on history. But that's a very brutal truth to people. You don't want to think of that you don't really want to, or at least people don't want to contemplate the conclusions of that. And when you really think about history and you think of the way history is taught, it really is a subversion of civilization. It's a subversion of everything that we know we hold dear. And I think that's a good trade-off into, that's a good lead up into this discussion of Heidegger and the event. And so, before we take a break, I want to say how utterly incredible that really, the gravity of it is. That it is a part of destroying civilization. That if you have people who are on the academic level, historians that love nothing but to destroy history, to destroy our perception of it, to warp our perception of history, and to do it for ideological reasons, this really is a great filter. It's a great filter of civilization. There has been civilizations that have had utter contempt for the past, but not really. Not to this extent. I remember I had a tweet about this once, and people said, well, what about Christianity? And yes, okay, I would say that there is instances where even the Catholic Church, but I was going to say that there is an interpretation of the Catholic Church that honors the pagan past, and I know I don't want to get into it because I really, I'm sensitive to these things because I think that the whole, like, on the E-right, the pagan versus Christianity is, I'm open to dialogue, but I think that there's a charitable interpretation of Catholicism. I know people like Araval discuss this. Maybe I'd get Araval on show one time. And maybe more than one time. He's a very interesting person. And there's people like Tom Rousel who are more charitable, and there's people who are less charitable, and there's people that are like just meme people, like what's that one person, the Hellenist, it's like every post Christianity is weak and cucked religion, blah, blah, blah. But I think that there is an interpretation of Christianity that probably does factor in a lot of the pagan past. But that being said, the reason I'm bringing this up is because as much as you could say, well, certain Christian civilizations or even certain other iterations of, for example, Hinduism with Vedanta that ignored a lot of the Vedic past, but this seems different. This is not a replacing of one history with another, replacing of history with another. This belief system is a nihilative one, in that this whole notion of civilization must die. It must be erased for something that is of a perpetual present that negates a possibility of a real futurism. I talk about this in my book on the aesthetic and artistic level, that there is no futurism, there is no new socialist man. And this is something that Land said in Xenosystems. I believe it was Xenosystems chapter 2, where he said that really the current ideology is the debasement of the past and the enslaving of the future for the present. And this is what really academic history has been brought under by these people, by these ideologues. That the past is something that is merely a brutal dystopia, and when it's not, the real past was by people that were just heckin' wholesome, awesome, like us. Common people, and they're, Roman multiculturalism was the exact same as our multiculturalism. Thank you, Mary Beard. Right? That is what the narrative is. This is why I say there's something different. There is a negation that doesn't lead to a synthesis. The way that you could say in certain interpretations of Catholicism and Orthodoxy and Christianity, there was a synthesis of the older pagan world, and that can go back and forth. I'm open to that debate, but this seems like a very scolding hatred that maybe certain sects of Christianity had for the pagan past. But it goes beyond that, because all of it should be erased. And there is no history, there's an eternal present. So there is no theology even. There is no telos to this new version of history. Everything before the 60s, and then again, everything before the 90s is evil and should be expunged because of my heckin' wholesome identities that are created nowadays. That there is no... Oh, and by the way, my heckin' wholesome identities, it's like they have to have it both ways. There was always the for example, the Transformers, the Decepticons, right? I make the joke. There was always people like me back in the past, but they were suppressed. Oh, but by the way, that the past created conditions that made it impossible. So it's like you can't have it both ways. This is the problem with the liberal historiography. That goes even beyond the Whig historians. It goes beyond the progressives of the 19th century. That would be very incredibly problematic for a variety of reasons nowadays to these people. So it really colors the younger generation's perception of history. You can see the utter contempt and hatred when a lot of these academic historians speak for the thing that they claim to love. And the fact that there has so many repercussions to our view as a civilization. I think that really is a good lead up into this discussion of the event in Heidegger. So take it away, Philip Dano. I know Philip Dano's been pumping out some new music, some new suits, or how do you say it, sweets or suits? Yeah, anyways, take it away. right, and we are back with a great, that was a great selection, a great piece by Philip Daniel. And this is the philosophy portion of the show. Also, I believe the new metal portion of the show. And, of course, there will be more philosophy in the paywalled version where I talk about Nick Land, I talk about human-guided epigenetical evolution, conscious evolution. What was that Faceless song? What was it called? Accelerated Evolution. And I believe it's from a clip from Waking Life that my good friend Julius posted, and Julius, who I believe is away for Lent. And I'm going to talk about Nick Land, specifically the essay Machinic Desire, because it does have a lot to do with evolution and the intersection of evolution and capital. Although I believe in other essays, Land makes the evolution thing more explicit, but it really lays out Land's accelerative model. And I think that I am doing a good service to Papa Land to read you the text and go through it. But anyways, this is a tweet thread that Thomas777T7 had where he's talking about Heidegger. And I wanted to explain the importance of the concept of the event to Heidegger, or Ereignis. Is that how I'm pronouncing it? Let me check. Sorry, Ereignis. I know it's like in English, sounds like Ereignis, the event. So this is what Thomas says. And of course, I know that Bap doesn't like Heidegger, but, well, I'm quite a fan of Heidegger, as Thomas is as well. I believe in his collection of essays that, I don't know if he's like, doesn't like that collection or for some reason, but it's, I believe, did Niccolo Salo, it's all from the Salo forums that Niccolo Salo compiled. You could find it some places. You can find the PDF. So he says in this books that he's recommending, such as De Weistra, Fichte, Carlyle, Said Quipt, Schopenhauer, René Guignon, Mircea Eliade, of course, Julius Evola. He says, addendum, ongoing. Why Heidegger? Because Heidegger, I'm not going to do the whole, he makes it, stuff in bold, right? So he says, why Heidegger? Because Heidegger explicates exhaustively why survival, and of course he says racial survival, this is what Thomas says, why racial survival, the linear perpetuation of culture, is absolutely essential. So, race is complicated, of course, in Heidegger, because you can say that instead of just a genetic thing, there are people that argue, there was another Heidegger scholar on Twitter that was arguing that, he had more of an all-encompassing definition, that he didn't exactly go along with every element of the biological definition that the certain regime he was a part of went with, but that's to be debated by academics. The linear perpetuation of culture is absolutely essential. The destruction of man's ability to transmit a historical consciousness. And that's really even above, I think, a lot of the racial aspect, the sort of the consciousness and the culture, but something that's living. Because you have to remember that Heidegger is a post-metaphysical thinker, which Thomas acknowledges here. The transmitted historical consciousness to capture historical time renders him not just down to the level of an animal, but it truly redacts the human being at scale. Because to Heidegger, everything must be within a historical consciousness. Because that is his whole project of Das Ein. That being and time are interlinked on a continuum, and sometimes on a recursive continuum, and it's the stark awareness of that finitude, of that mortality, that defines Das Ein. That only man can really experience the consciousness of being towards death, of being as an event, of arising up from the just mere world of, or the world of matter, that man creates this culture that has a lot to do with historical consciousness. And through that awareness of historical consciousness, that's living in the world, not something metaphysical. Of course, near the end of his life, Heidegger contemplated metaphysics again. That's a greater discussion. People that are more learned than I in Heidegger, such as Michael Millerman. Maybe one day I'll bring him on show and we'll talk about it. that Heidegger has this unique disposition towards historical consciousness because that is the basis from which humanity arises, from which humanity clears. It's the clearing. And we are called forth in history, right? The clearing of knowledge, of history, of philosophy is precisely embedded in that awareness, because you have to remember, those are the two things that are deeply interwoven. I know I'm sort of bastardizing it and butchering it, but history and time, or being and time. To understand being is to understand, and again, he's getting this from Kant, right? Even though in some ways he's an anti-Kantian thinker, that man is embedded in that, the grafting, what Kant would say the faculties, right? And the understanding that they create the conditions by which we understand such things as time, as space, as measure, the a priori concepts and the understanding, right? That was, of course, that was Kant's Copernican turn, right? Which is that man is the one. By man, I mean the royal man, humanity. The subject, the human. Das Ein is the one that gives order to precisely that nature. That it turns inward rather than outward, rather than, for example, even before Kant or during Kant, you have, like, for example, Locke when you read Locke, for example, his metaphysical system rather than the politics, that there's superstructures of nature that the soul intuits and so forth, and Leibniz, of course, with all of his the monadology and so forth. But Heidegger is taking that and he's saying that we also condition history, but history also conditions us as well. It's a further turning, if you will. So then T777 says, Heidegger posits that, but it truly destroys being at scale. It redacts humans at scale to erase historical consciousness, which is, again, what people like I said, the NIMBYs, what they're trying to do, what academic historians are trying to do. So see, there you go. I took coal and I made a gem. I took discourse that came from this week and I wedded it to something more important. So then he says, Heidegger posits that the ultimate reality, I don't think he's phrasing it that way, that the ultimately real, sorry, I'm mistaken. Heidegger posits that the ultimately real, right, as in the real, I mean, you have to read Baudrillard to understand the concept. The way in which the individual man overcomes death is through concrete, and I'm going to emphasize, because not just because he emphasized it in his very funny language, but it's something to be emphasized, through the concrete historical experience. Okay? Keep this in your mind when it comes to understanding id eigenes. Concrete historical experience. The event. And participation in the perennial historical experience of the Volk, or the people. And I don't know, he's using this in right-wing language, but if you were to bracket the fact that it's coming from T7, that's coming from the E-right, bracket that for a moment, just focus on the philosophy. When Heidegger means people. When he means Volk in the original German. So don't I know T7 has a particular interpretation, which he'll say at the end of this paragraph. Not through some kind of transcendence or rapturous experience, whereby we come to know God and leave memory and mind behind, which all traditions have. Whether it's moksha, or to know Nirguna Brahman in Vedanta, or whether it is kenosis in Eastern Orthodoxy, and grace in Catholicism, whether it's sort of the releasing of the individual self into this greater cosmic consciousness that we know to be God. Heidegger is saying that, and he gets this from Nietzsche, you have to really know Heidegger's historical influences, that even though near the end of his life he's open to the metaphysical again, but Heidegger has a very particular way of saying, with that interview with Hubert Dreyfus, that only a God can save us in Der Spiegel. Right? That's a very complicated statement for Heidegger. Because it is the God of being. Maybe it's not the Christian metaphysical God. But let's bracket this for now, because of course this is the middle Heidegger. This is the turning of Heidegger in Being and Time, and of course later in Language, Poetry, and Thought, he gets into other things. Although some people deny the fact. I remember in grad school, people denied this, that there was 2 periods of Heidegger. But that's the academic inside baseball. The point being is that it is lived in the immanentized, in the immanent, not the transcendent, not the transcendental. It is historical consciousness as it operates on the ground in this plane of being. That we can experience historical consciousness as it is within being, as das Ein. That das Ein is because we are human, we're uniquely aware of that historical consciousness, and we can feel it, and it becomes a living history. But one that is a gathering to Heidegger. It gathers together. I'm doing the John A. Weaver hands. It's gathering together as a people. Because to Heidegger, das Ein still needs a context to experience this historical awareness that is immanent rather than transcendental. You need that context of a people, of a nation, of a Volk, and so forth. And you can easily see why Heidegger was, at least initially, swayed by a certain mid-century German regime. I'm not making any, for YouTube purpose, I'm not making any moral judgments on that. I'm not saying anything about that. I'm just saying that, and even people like I attended a seminar once, a debate with that guy that had the book about, he was going after the right, where you had the book about where reading Nietzsche and Heidegger will turn you into a fan of the Austrian painter. But I'm saying that it makes sense within the philosophic context. I'm not making any judgment about that, either negatively or positively. For those listening, that may be misunderstood. But I'm saying that man needs that immediate context because it relates to Heidegger's concept of care and thrownness. You must have a care for the surroundings. You start in the middle, what Deleuze would call a double articulation. That there isn't a sort of cogito where there's an originary position that because you have to stop infinite regression and so forth. You start right away from that web of context. And therefore you are compelled. What Heidegger means by care is concern. Not just like you care for another person in the colloquial term, but rather you have a concern about beings and the being around you. The being that a social context, a civilizational context provides for you. Right? And this leads up to this discussion of event, which I will read a paper on. Anyways, not through some kind of transcendence, rapturous experience where we come to know God and leave memory and mind behind. So again, for Heidegger, absence, post-death of God, which means the understanding of God in civilization, in the West in particular, what do we have left? We have that idea of a civilization. We have that idea of historical consciousness that comes to us as a living, immanent thing. I mean, thing is a complicated term, but anyways. This is key. It's utterly essential. Otherwise, you cannot justify, let's say, base sympathies or commitments. And any interest you have in Rasse or Volk, in culture, right? Any interest you have in the essence of culture. So, of course, basically, people translate it to race, but it means something more than race as well. In the German context and what Heidegger was meaning by it. But of course, Thomas is, he's of particular ideology, so he's using that in the colloquial term. In cultural survival is just a fetish for eugenics or some practical policy-centered enterprise. So he's really saying to that cartoonish character, this is what T7 is saying, the cartoonish character that people have of the newer right, or whatever people call it, like the Nietzschean Bappian vitalists, or what are those people at Compact, or what are those people that Adrian Vermeule or Sorbamari call like the Nietzschean nihilists? That it's basically like 19th century, E-word genics. Thomas is saying that, if you abandon Heidegger, if you abandon historical awareness, and it's basically just a form of technocracy that has a little bit of a racial consciousness, but it's got this like liberal, like managerialism. That's essentially what the hairdo believes. You know what I mean by, who I'm talking about, Big Spence, right? Like this is what a lot of these people, not a lot, but like this is what certain people believe, right? And so when Big Spence is going out there and standing NATO and saying Macron is the best, he's like a Jupiterian figure, or all of this other stuff, I mean, you can see what the context is. Because it's very funny how his ex-wife also has an interest in Heidegger, so now he like lives to chide everything that his ex holds dear, whether it be Heidegger or Russia or whatever. It's very funny that way. But then not to go into drama. The point being is that Thomas is saying you have to understand historical consciousness, you have to understand Heidegger if you want to, or else it just becomes this like very sort of vacuous policy proposal type of stuff that can very easily lay into the hands of the political left by saying that, oh, that's not just a meme, you actually want millions to you know what, right? But that's besides the point. I want to bracket the politics and focus on this nature of historical consciousness in the event. So let me pull up an academic paper, or rather an academic explainer of Ereignis, event to Heidegger. And again, I'm not making any ideological judgments, so please, if YouTube is listening or whoever is listening, I'm not making any ideological judgments on this. I realized that my tone of voice, I think, what was a tweet? It was a comment on the Digital Archipelago that explained, was it comparing me to Paglia's motor mouth? Or was it something else? It was, oh yeah, here you go. My brain hurts. Gio sounds like Socrates delivered in the style of Dennis Hopper in Apocalypse Now. That's a great description, actually. That's amazing. I love that one. I kind of do have that tone of voice. I kind of do have the Paglia motor mouth, but anyway. So this is from Philosophy Archive, and of course I will try to tone down the motor mouth a little bit to explain the concept. Ereignis. With Ereignis event, Heidegger has sublated Aufbung, oh god, not the logo definition. Anyways, that's a little meme history there. Heidegger has sublated being and time, seeing their mutual dependence, the impossibility of their interdependence, and thus transgressed their boundaries. Ereignis is the happening of being, the unfolding of being, the temporalizing of being, the turning of thought. As such, Ereignis is prior to, and the transcendent both, it transcends, it's prior to, the event is prior to and transcends both being and time. Ereignis captures the and of being and time. So to Heidegger, unlike Kant, with the a priori concepts of the understanding, to Heidegger is the event. And a lot of continental philosophy will do this. The event is one that coalesces different elements of both being and time, of events within the world, upsurges into this thing that we know is being, and the interdependence of both being and that historical consciousness turns into the event of being. Being is an event that it goes on, but it has a distinct periodization of time. It has discrete moments. It can have a beginning and an end, but rather the beginning and the end are sort of very vague and opaque. Heidegger shows the possibility of an understanding of Ereignis in knowing from out of understanding of the Gestalt and framing of modern technology. An excellent way of approaching in knowing would be to look into the essence of enframing, insofar as it is a passage from metaphysics to another time, a Janus head. It is called on time and being and time, for enframing is essentially ambiguous. So, and of course it explains it, but in knowing. So here we see the word in knowing. To know means that is excess of the norm or average, something that is splendid, something that is a culmination of things that are in essence or outside of the know. And of course, knowing has, this comes from contributions to philosophy from Heidegger. And so in knowing, of course, has something to do with hermeneutics as well. But here's the definition on Wikipedia. Hubert Dreyfus talks about things coming into themselves by belonging together. In Ereignis, an event, but better understood in terms of something coming into view. Being is coming into view. Your own being can only be known by care to understand the event of being. Ereignis. Things coming into themselves by belonging together, according to Hubert Dreyfus, one of the most important Heidegger scholars, if not the most important. The word in knowing, that is connection of things that arise and appear, something that is beyond the mundane, that arises, it's an upsurge. Being is something that disrupts an equilibrium. We don't know where being comes from. But we know that by being together, by being within historical consciousness, because the only way to know the other is to know the history collectively together of ourselves, that is the way you know being. That is the way you know the event of being, the coming into view of being. Ereigness, the event. Being is an event. Being is not a cogito. Being is not a metaphysical maxim to Heidegger, the way it is for Kant, the way it was for Descartes, and so forth. Being is rather an event. It's something the Continentals have a very fluid concept of. From the postmodernists, the post-structuralists, the existential phenomenology like Heidegger, they share this relation of being as an event. Something that comes together as a culmination, something that's a bit more conceptually slippery than, say, Kantian metaphysics. So this comes from, in the original German, from Contributions to Philosophy, we must return to what we call a concern. This is Heidegger now. The word a concern, the word Ereignis, concern, has been lifted from organically developing language. Ereigen, to concern, means originally to distinguish or discern with one's own eyes to see, and in seeing calls to oneself appropriate. The word concern we shall now harness as a theme word in the service of thought. I'll explain how it relates to inframing, which people are probably familiar with when it comes to Heidegger. But the point being is that you can only experience this individually. That there is an interplay, and of course Heidegger uses the term echo, the constant interplay between being and beingness. I know it's a lot of concepts to be thrown at you, but it's the necessity of understanding on an individual and eminent level within the current view of historical consciousness, within this world, not something that's merely transcendental, something that's given to you from grace by God, but rather something that you experience, that you must have concern in terms of the concern for what is being around you, what is history and what is time. So in knowing relates to that, something that is above the norm. And so this is why Heidegger becomes very confused with the language of clearing, coming into view, the gathering forth of being, to gather forth all of these different events within historical consciousness to truly understand what being means on an individual level. To call to oneself appropriate, the word concern shall now harness as a theme word in service of thought. So how does this relate then to inframing? So from Phil Archives, it says, an excellent way of approaching in doubt and knowing would be to look into the essence of framing. And then it says, because we are so entranced by science and the achievements of technology and see all problems in their terms, so all things are merely stock and reserved to expropriate, to understand, to pick apart scientifically, to create as stock, to inframe means to gather, and to create a standing reserve, right? Like clear cutting a forest, expropriating resources from oil, for example. If you want to read Being in Oil by Chad Haig. I highly recommend. Maybe one day I'll get Chad Haig on the show. Because it's another travesty that my former quote-unquote co-host has him on, and, well, anyways. It becomes obvious that being has abandoned us. Either we wrest content this way of seeing or dealing, perceiving and conceiving everything, or we abandon it and looking for another way. But either way we are caught to determine by Geseil, by inframing. But where the danger is, grows the saving power also. Right? So that, and of course Heidegger was a fan of Hölderlin. And that's a quote from Hölderlin, saying that the thing that is most dangerous in framing, technology, science, is something that can also be liberatory. So again, you know how Heidegger, this is how phenomenology works. It's going back to the basic things themselves. That's bracketing any sort of transcendental distinction for what is immediate to us, what is sensuous to us. In an important passage also on time of being, Heidegger reveals how Ereignis stands outside of being and time and must be thought of in terms of concealment rather than unconcealment. So, quote, with the entry of thinking into Ereignis, its own way of concealment proper to it also arrives. Id is in itself expropriation, in wing ignis. This word contains in a matter of consummate with id the early Greek lethe in the sense of concealing. Aletheia, lethe, to conceal but also to reveal, right? Technology is the danger. Science is a danger to Heidegger, the way that certain forms of secularized transcendental metaphysics are, because it is the final revealing. It takes being, it destroys historical consciousness, same the way that, like, for example, like YIMBY managerialism destroys communities. It takes things it purports to be objective on a measure that is purely material, but also destroys our sense of history because there no longer is any concealment of being. There no longer is anything to be revealed. There is nothing left to sap from nature. Nature is fully revealed. Our being is fully revealed. Everything is broken down into the conditions by which science and technology dictate, and therefore our historical consciousness is quickly erased. This, if you listen to the science enjoyers, if you listen to people like Lawrence Krauss or Steve Pinker, both in the flight logs, by the way, if you listen to people like Hitchin, well, when he was alive, or Dawkins, like, they truly believe this. The science stands, they don't believe in any sort of like philosophic quibbling over anything. He's like, well, if we know the truth, then that's it. This one particular set of material physical truth, and that's pretty much it. Like Neil deGrasse Tyson is, of course, the low IQ version of that. So here he says, id can also be understood as the precondition for an understanding both of being and time and their relationship in terms of the shift in Heidegger's thought from the meaning of being and time to the truth of being and time, the history of being, the topology of being, the language of being. You can only understand all of those things unless you have a sense of history. If you have this sense, this concern of that which is around you, to understand the event of being, is to understand the history that we are in, the time of being, the people around us, the people in general that create meaning in terms of who we are. All of these things must be understood. But all these things are concealed. Nature slips in and out, kind of like the Taoist literati painting. Things that come back and forth and breathe. The painting breathes. There are trees in the background that are very simple, very thinned out brushstrokes of ink. Things that pop back and forth to the picture plane. There's no illusion to three-dimensional space the way there is in the West, where it's like total unconcealment, total revealing of what the thing is in the painting. So it's a very useful, and of course, this is from my study in my philosophy department, when I was studying Chinese art, that I subsequently wrote my master's thesis on. So it's to understand what that interplay is between all things. There's concealment and revealing of being. So, but also time as well. Time grounds being in historical consciousness. To truly understand what being is, the event of being, is to also understand time and vice versa. But truth, history, topology, and language, so again, it's a topology, it's a geography of history, rather than just a transcendental distinction. But truth, history, and topology and language must here be understood outside of metaphysics, always away from the taint of the human subjectivity and its corresponding objectivism. So again, going back to the things themselves. Not a totalizing system of knowledge, not a totalizing science that reveals all being, but to go simply back to nature. This is why Heidegger was, really into the pre-Socratics and into Nietzsche and so forth. This is the basis of phenomenology. We must think beyond the subject-object dichotomy and embrace the unity of the cosmos by which we are the microcosm. So, from Wittgenstein. But a microcosm whose story is also the story of being. To not say that we are supreme subject and object. There's no real hypostasis, no real substance dualism in Heidegger. All of this has gone to really embrace an existential comportment, behavior, activity of being. To go back to how we are in the cosmos as historical man. that we are beings of both time and history, that we are beings that experience those things, rather than being a transcendental maxim that is a sort of an Archimedean point for a transcendental schema. This is something that Heidegger goes against. It's understanding a true tradition of historical consciousness away from those post-Enlightenment metaphysics that can lead into a secular version, which we now see as total enframing of all life. Total science head enframing, where everything is understood, everything can be broken down into quantifiable bits, everything can be enframed as resources, including humanity itself. That you are just caloric intake, that you are just a cog in a machine. The narrative being, the narrative begins from a new place. Actually, it is no place, utopia, as it is outside of metaphysical conceptions because it starts further back. It is the originary of nature. Is that what brings forth an awareness of being? Not something that is placing a transcendental system on top of being. This is what Heidegger is getting under. All we can possibly have is a premonition of where and how to begin originally, and what it means to start with ideigenes, the event of being. How did being come forth? How did being clear the way for our understanding of being? Because there is a thing, being qua being, what we know to be something that exists. But how did we come about the awareness of that? Right? All we can possibly have is a premonition of where and how to begin originally, and what it means to start with ideigenes, the event of being. Anything more, or knowing that which is uncanny. Anything more than a premonition would be to rely upon an installation or an understanding which we can only occur out of metaphysics and its corollary epistemology, which is, again, all metaphysics tend to be closed systems of metaphysics. These two, although always go hand in hand, insinuating and instantiating by one another makes the mass, which often is what passes for philosophy. To start further back would be to abandon all methods that philosophy has adopted. So Heidegger is radically upending the philosophic tradition, as we all know, colloquially about Heidegger. One could not begin with a theory. Description alone would be allowable, but now in Wittgenstein's sense of description, but not in Wittgenstein's sense of description, because what we would need is not reliance upon everyday usage of words, but rather an unfolding of the meaning of the fundamental words of philosophy, and reaching back to their non-philosophic beginnings. Because philosophy creates Baroque systems that ignore the actual words that are being used, which people often, ironically enough, accuse Heidegger of. Not in terms of use, but in terms of depth of potential meaning. Premonition would be, will we have begin, quote, lightning bolt strikes and all is revealed, to Heraclitus. The light of being, the original Platonic, well, I know Heidegger is in some ways an anti-Platonic thinker, but the original sort of metaphor of the sun that gives light to all things, to all being. That becomes eminentized for Heidegger. It's not transcendence, it's not the forms, but it is awareness of being, the light of being, the clearing forth that philosophy brings. And the only way you can do this is to go back to the non-philosophic language, to go back to the actual meaning of things that are uncorrupted by metaphysical distinctions, by philosophic systems, and so forth. And that's the only way you can really, truly understand being. But how do you understand being if not to understand what is around being? What is time? What is a people? What is culture? The only way, and like what T7 said, the only way to maintain culture is to have a historical consciousness, or else it's for naught, or else you can't really do it, because you're just creating things anew over and over again, and you're saying like this is tradition, or this is the way we know reality, or this is the way we know being, but it's not really getting at the root of things from your cosmopolitan liberal science head perception, or from your transcendental metaphysical perception of being. Heidegger's cutting both things. He's cutting the science head materialists out, and he's cutting the transcendental philosophers out. And he's saying go back to the things themselves. And when we do that, we see that being is an event. Being is a gathering of time, gathering of what being constitutes being by what is around being, and then we can know being. We can know the truth of it, what is revealed to us and what is also concealed. It's the unknown unknowns of concealment of being that we can have access to. This premonition is not just about where we are now and how we can process a glimmer of the excessive meaning and the story yet to be told, but more significantly, this premonition harkens back to the origin, to the very nature of what it is for there to be a beginning. The premonition precedes language, thought, consciousness, and thus ein. It makes them possible. It is not our premonition, it is being's. What if to truly understand anything is to understand it in terms of its opposition, or better, its non-possibility, that from which it arises prior to its presence? We can now consider life sacred, but prior to this and instantiating it was the practice of sacrifice. In order to sacrifice, life cannot be sacred, but rather becomes sacred through the ritual. We focus upon what is said, not silence. Upon thought, not what is unspeakable. Upon explanation, not mystery. And this is, of course, a lot of people who are into OOO, object-oriented ontology, that are influenced by Heidegger, like Graham Harman, although Graham Harman himself is sort of like a very cantankerous lib. They focus on this because it goes into non-things, non-being, non-event. What is prior to being, what is concealed from us. That's almost like Taoism in a way. To know the form, to know something before it was a thing. The uncarved block, the unbleached stone, right? To know non-things is a contradiction. But when you really look at it, it's to know the precondition for something that comes into being, that clears forth or makes room for the possibility of being. A lot of people have written a lot of things on Heidegger and Taoism. I was accustomed to a lot of that literature because I was in a very crazy grad program. But anyways, honesty arises out of innocence, the lack of guile, prior to the guile and shame, prior to the knowledge of good and evil, prior to the intelligence to question which comes with maturity and the possibility of choosing between competing opinions. Honesty depends upon the oblivion, leth, of ignorance. Leth, the oblivion, the river of oblivion in Greek mythology, concealment, non-being, forgetfulness. To forget those maxims, to go back to what is there. To go back to the original things. The river of forgetting. This is what Heidegger wants to cross into. And of course, there's other definitions as well. The meaning of leth and forgetfulness. Oblivion, personification of oblivion, also the name of a river playing in the infernal regions. But it means forgetfulness. It means the concealment of being, right? To forget all of those systems, to go back to the things themselves, to go back to the event of being. Then you develop a historical consciousness because it is what is around being, to have a care for what is around you as an individual being. Metaphysics is a study of what exists, substance and the properties prior to it, the interplay of existentia and essentia, what exists and what is the essence of existence. Leads inexorably to the domination of scientific method, the enframing of Gestalt and the meaninglessness of nihilism. So in a way, metaphysics, as it developed after the Enlightenment, ironically led to its destruction. It led to a total revealing, and it led to the way of thinking about being that is totally revealed. A complete metaphysical system that eats away at metaphysics. This is what the science head wants. When you talk to a scientist, it's like you're talking to a Kantian or some other metaphysician that has a maxim to explain all of reality. And Heidegger says that is the danger. That is what that it's like, and again, he gets this from Nietzsche. What did Nietzsche say in the birth, not the birth of tragedy, way later, in the Antichrist, in the Twilight of Idols, where he says that Christianity, in the Enlightenment, abstracted itself to such a degree that its original metaphysical impulse, its original sacredness was depleted. And it becomes even more of a faith claim, becomes even more of a Baroque system. And then by the time you get to Kant, it was over. By the time you get to Hegel and Kant, that could very easily get turned into what we know as modern scientific materialism, where all of nature is now revealed to us, or supposedly. That there's no longer any need even for God, because it's all been deduced within that transcendental system. That is just the transcendental system and not that which it claims to honor. Because you have to remember, to be charitable, even Kant near the end of his life pulled back and say, I make room for faith, because of course he was a devout Lutheran. And he realized that people after Kant would come about and reify his system even further into the abstraction that leads to a form of nihilism. Because Kant says, no, that is also the danger. Therefore, I make room for faith. Right? And then who comes after Kant? You know, Kierkegaard, Hegel. And even Hegel had a relation to his faith as well. That's, you know, you can't totally blame them. But you can blame people like Steve Pinker and Lawrence Krauss. But anyways. So nature loves to hide to Heraclitus. And of course, Heidegger takes this to heart. Nature loves to hide. The concealment of being. The mystery of being, the truth of being is concealed to us because we can only experience it individually. We can experience its time, we can experience the culture and the people around us. But the being qua being, even Heidegger at the end of his life said only a God can save us from the final revealing of being. And of course I caution that by saying that Heidegger probably meant something different than the Christian God, but you never know. Truth is unconcealment, aletheia. It's a different definition of truth than something that is metaphysical. It is not the Platonic forms in Heidegger. It is not the transcendental distinction. It's not the cogito. It is something that is present within us as we experience it. And of course, continental philosophy takes this and runs with it. Sartre in particular is to experience being, is a being for itself, not in itself. Something that experienced that existential crisis, that anxiety over its place in the world. That is Heidegger's truth. It is aletheia, it's unconcealment, it's the experiential nature of going into life, having concern for being. It is not merely the truth that is handed down to you by God, or the truth that is handed down to you by the forms, or some kind of transcendental distinction, by some noumenal distinction. It's a very radically different form of truth that, again, he probably is getting from Nietzsche. And of course, you know, Heidegger gets this from Spengler as well. And Spengler engages with Hegel more than anyone. I would say Spengler is probably a better historian of Hegel than even Marx. I know it's a very controversial statement, but, you know, whatever. It's going to piss off all the right people. The world surrounds us and intimidates us with its grandeur and alterity, its ability to transform, its ability to change, like mitochondria, like proteins, like natural events, like the weather. What Kant would call the sublime has an element of unpredictable change. The excess of presence after fear and anxiety. So again, this is where anxiety comes from. After the attunement of the logos and public opinion, after the ability to act on our desires, which ultimately rule everything that we do, the world depends upon the primordiality of the earth. The earth is ancient. Our impulses seem unnatural, but they are natural. The sublime of the world around us, the experiencing of being, those are all things that give us an attunement to being, even our desires. And this is where anxiety comes from. It's the overwhelming nature of the mystery of being. This is why science heads run towards their maxims. The way that religious fanatics run towards their maxims, the way that transcendental philosophers run towards their Baroque systems, because it comes, what Heidegger says, is all of that comes from anxiety. The anxiety around the alterity, the transforming, and the magnanimity, and the grandeur of being. That makes sense. And in the anxiety, and I believe this is what also drives the leftist, by the way, the modern left liberal, the modern neoliberal leftist, is a desire to conquer history completely. the way that the Enlightenment tried to conquer history and to conquer nature. It's the dual conquer, even though they have a lot of contradictory things about like native peoples and colonization and the Earth Man. What do you think environmentalism is? Not the Linkola, Ted Kaye, Derek Jensen version of environmentalism, deep ecology and all that. The like Extinction Rebellion, climate protesters. It's the anxiety over annihilative nothing. But their system, ironically enough, entails nothing. Step out of existence by not having kids, don't consume anything, become like nature, become like yeast. They are yeast. It's not this romantic love of nature that radical thinkers on the environmentalist side have had for decades now. It is not something romantic. It is the antithesis of romance. It is saying that the world is yeast and we are yeast. Because a lot of what drives the neoliberal, the left liberal, is an anxiety over history, an anxiety over nature, and an anxiety over the grandeur of it, the scalability of humanity that faces these hard limits. There can be no longer any hard limits. We must, and notice how a lot of these people are science heads and are atheists, that they've dropped all of their new age thing that they had in the 80s and 90s. That even though they still give lip service to like woke other cultures and belief systems and indigenous ways of knowing, reality, what the God of science that they worship will erase all of that. Because it is the anxiety over not knowing. It's the anxiety over the unconcealment of being. And therefore you have to have a totalizing, planetary, scientific managerialism, and you have to fetishize what works, really, that compels them. It is an anxiety over being that compels the neoliberal, the left liberal, you name them, right? You name it, because whatever you want to call them, GAE, LGBT, CIA, by POC communism, what I'm referring to, right? It's all of this. It's a way of grasping in the darkness of being to say that, no, we are going to stand atop the whole planet and transform it to our will. And so you can see that instrumental reason from the Enlightenment, that leads to the modern progressive. That driving force to conquer God and nature out of anxiety that is present in all of these people. That's where they're coming from. So anyways, I know this article is not going to say that, but I'll that's my deduction anyways. Epistemology assumes and presumes direct access to truth in terms of the correctness of what is thought and what is said. We only exhume that which we already know, that which we are comfortable with. The rest we pass over as irrelevant, or we turn away from it and pretending it is not there, things in themselves to Kant. We flee from what is too much to comprehend, and thus we flee from each other and ourselves. History is immutable. History is icky and bad. And we don't like history because it's like, there's so many tens of millions of people that came before us, our ancestors, billions of people actually, that created these systems, that created this thinking, that created these traditions, and we don't like it, we reject it, because it is not what is not known to us. It is a limit to our being. It is a limit to our knowing. Tradition is the vote of the Colopolis, of the graveyard, of the dead. The expedition is taken in solitude, and that is a fundamental error. Our historicity and communality are denied, and with them any possibility of learning. Knowledge is virtue, Socrates, and thus fundamentally ethical. Knowledge is being with and being worlded, and thus fundamentally metaphysical. Truth is being situated, das Ein. Truth is being here now. I know it's the Ram Dass thing, but truth is being situated within historical consciousness. You can't have truth without history. You can't have truth even without tradition. You can't have truth with at least the awareness of the history that you grow up in, of your people, of who you are. Without that, you erase everything. The way that science and framing of technology erases being itself. These people want to erase history. It's a way of obliterating truth of being. And this is why T777 is so emphatic about Heidegger. Because or else you're just going to have some managerial eugenics program and it's not going to work out. Anyways. To be human is to be responsible. I don't think I'm going to read the rest, but for others as well as ourselves, with justice and with equity, with the authenticity which comes from identifying with one that has been and one who may become, past and future. You need both. Because remember, being has to conceal anew. Being has to come forth and clear, and we are called to being. This is the calling to Heidegger. Being must conceal, therefore there must be a future, but there also must be a past. If there is an eternal present, there is no being. There is non-being. The way that Byung-Chul Han, who is again a Heidegger scholar, says there is non-things that do not serve us. They're virtual. They are like the non-places. Our world is filled with non-places because they lack a history, therefore they will lack a future. They are the product of neoliberal managerialism, or what, I know people don't like that word, but like they're the product of a particular form of instrumental reason that ends being as we know it in terms of historical consciousness, in terms of a people, a nation, a folk, whatever you want to call it, a gathering forth together where we have concern for these common areas that give us meaning. They don't give us meaning anymore because they're open to everyone. They're open to the world, man. Anyways, we focus upon languages and ignore language. We focus upon references and ignore meaning. And we finally do turn our attention to meaning when we then ignore meaningfulness. A word or phrase can only have meaning for it is meaningful in language. It is language in life and in culture and history. In the cosmos, not truth as correctness nor truth as error, like Nietzsche says. Truth is language, not language is the house of being, Heidegger. Language is being. To be meaningful is to count, to take account of, and to hold oneself to account. That is logos, whether it's divine or eminent. When one is all, hen panta, and all is the same, tat auto, when rationality is a gift rather than a possession, when all that is one comes from ourselves, to be meaningful is to be limited yet to determined by the unlimited. Aperion, aporia, what is left to indistinguishable judgment. What is aphoretic dialogue, what is left to something that is open-ended, that can be left to interpretation. The four major areas: ethics, metaphysics, epistemology, and philosophy of language interact. So this part, the origin of philosophy is the same as the origin of humanity. Aristotle defines mankind as not just the rational animal, but also the social animal, the political animal, particularly the animal with language. So Heidegger loves all this, the political animal, rational animal, language. Because it means to gather forth together. This is the problem, okay? This is the problem. See, Heidegger's not against reason. He's not an irrationalist. He's not a mystic. He's saying reason has a place. Reason can get us to the origins of things but those origins are unconcealed. They're open-ended. They come forth into the clearing of being. They come forth in history, not in a transcendental distinction, nor in a material analysis, the way there is in like Marxism, in like these science heads. Like, I'm really picking on Steve Pinker and Lawrence Krauss, but you know those types, right? The positive atheists, the dims. They like to call themselves the Brights back then. Remember when they used to call themselves the Brights? You don't see that much anymore. Anyways, the point being is that you need a historical consciousness. Because you have to realize, and this is my final note, because this is a very long philosophical discussion, and I know people are confused, and please, if you're confused, comment below on YouTube or wherever, Substack, you name it. One final note about what Heidegger was dealing with. Heidegger was dealing with and was acutely aware of the post-metaphysical age, the death of God in our popular understanding. And Heidegger was trying to revive philosophy in a way that made sense to our world, while also calling back into the past. The only way to revive something like philosophy is to go back to the non-philosophical, to go back to language, to go back to the Greeks, to go back to the original meaning of things. The only way to save something is to radically cut off what had been built up before, and to embrace anew, ironically enough, and Michael Millerman talks about this, by embracing a radical primordial past, by going right back to that place of innocence. To innocently love. And this is what, I think this is what Thomas is saying. T777. You can't be on the right unless you love something, unless you love a people. I know Araval had a video recently about this. Unless you love something, not that you just hate the libs. I mean, we all hate the libs. We all hate something. But it's to really love the intangibleness of someone else, of history, of your people, of who you are, and to truly experience it innocently again, in knowing. To know, to something that, an event that culminates into who you are, and to be aware of the finitude of being, of your being. And even in the end of his life with Heidegger, when he made that statement about God, to radically, and a lot of postmodern theology, they do this as well. I mean, I know my friend Wired has told me, and Aris has told me to read certain things, to radically abandon certain tendencies in theology and to embrace anew with innocent eyes the sort of postmodern understanding of what divinity is. That to see God anew is to embrace something very primordial. And then our traditions that are built up can come after. Now, as I'm saying this, as I'm calming down my my voice, my motor mouth, the Paglia motor, like being and it's like a clearing in the being, and you gotta have the, then you gotta like know historical consciousness, and I can't do the Paglia very well, but you know, maybe I can because I'm Italian, but anyways, and listen, promise me, I know this sounds totally ridiculous. It sounds totally ridiculous, but I can do a Heideggerian analysis of the trip-hop classic. The nightclub trip-hop 90s classic by Sneaker Pimps, Spin Spin Sugar. I was calming down, I was listening to the live set, I believe it was from Route de Rock in, I believe, 97. And I love that live version of Spin Spin Sugar because it's kind of rocky, it's raw, it's not as refined, it's very mysterious. Let me break down the lyrics for you. I'm going to do a Heideggerian analysis of Spin Spin Sugar. Here we go. I'm probably going to fail, but you never know. So let's examine the lyrics of Spin Spin Sugar. About like the hotel room and the need for love and the need for the other and the sort of like sordid details of living in a non-place and experiencing that feeling. I know this. Well, I know this a bit. I'm everyone, I feel used. I'm everyone, I need you. I am being, qua being. I experience being by needing the other. I'm everyone, hang your label on me. The coloring of being by who I am with, by the context of which I am a being. I'm everyone, painted black and white and easy. I'm everyone, sticks in me. I'm everyone, sticks with me. I want perfection, I real need. I am need itself. I am care, to which being calls forth to me in the other. To know the other is to know oneself. To have care for beings around you, and that is the gateway. The history with the other, the care for the other, concern, the unknowing of being, the uniqueness of my being, intersecting with that historical consciousness of my relational aspect of being around me. That is the way that I know me. I am need itself. I am care. I am concern itself. I've seen attention see through me. Call on me, spin, spin, sugar. Crawl on me, spin, sugar. Stick to me, stick on me, spin. And of course, it's describing relationship. Twist for me, spin, spin, sugar. That you are twisting around me. We're in this primordial dance of being. That I call forth to you as you see your being in me. And that is the only way that we can know. It is an innocent longing that the song Spin Spin Sugar calls forth. So that is my Heideggerian analysis of Spin Spin Sugar. I wish I could play this song, but because of copyright, it'll get demonetized. So here's another section by Philip Daniel, and then we'll go into more fun topics, such as nu metal and men, as according to the Turf from the Hollow Earth. Take it away again. All right, and we are back for our favorite segment of the show, where I talk about the opinions of a woman. That's my my fans really love that. You guys all love that, don't you? Don't you? You know, I'm just you know that was it from Red Dragon, that one meme, or there was another one, another movie, but there was the one, there was that scene with Philip Seymour Hoffman, God rest his soul. I recently watched the film Happiness, by the way, which maybe I might review. But it's Philip Seymour Hoffman and the slideshow being presented by Red Dragon, which is, of course, Ralph Fiennes. And he's got the tattoo of the, you know, the Red Dragon from... He's got a tattoo of the Dragon Man, from, which is the... Was it an actual painting or was it a print by William Blake? Was it Poem of Heaven and Hell? I think it was from Heaven and Hell. Yeah, of course. Someone made a meme. I think it may have been... Was it Dudley Newright or was it... Who was it? I'm trying to think of who it was that made this meme of that image, and it's like, here's Gio talking about e-girls, and look at it. Look at it. It's... Oh boy, I might get into trouble for this, because I know that this particular poster is not very liked by a lot of people in the E-right. But at the same time, unlike your garden variety rad femme or e-girl, you people can't get enough of her for some reason. Some weird, crazy reason. And I think the reason is perfectly summarized by, underneath this thread, it's a long post, a comment by Asha Logos. And I think that's why, like, a lot of right-wingers keep following Rad Femme Austrian Painter. The reason RFH is so interesting is because it's as if God mixed together equal parts of genius and idiocy, love and hate, Lilith and Eve, and as a playful joke said, good luck sorting this one out. Oh boy. It's true. I think that, you know, I mean, Kathrine Dee said, you know, Kathrine said it the best. You really have to look at RFH as a humor account. And I think that there is something there. Okay, here's the thing. I don't detect, okay, maybe there is. Maybe there is. But I think that beyond the surface, you know, below the surface, rather, unlike a lot of Rad Femme Cole accounts that you're seeing, they're very popular. They all have, like, Asian woman PFPs, profile pictures, because, like, they worship the Korean voluntary extinctionist femcells. Unlike RFH, I know that... I don't know this for sure, but I don't detect a lot of seething hatred in the same sense. Is there seething hatred there? Maybe. But I think that she's playing with it. That she's having fun with it. She probably does like a lot of the right-wing guys, even some of them that chide her and, you know, go after her. I think that she loves wrestling in the mud with the boys, you know what I mean? And she's got a different energy than, say, your average Rad Femme poster that usually is isolated, never engages with the E-right, and will always live to seethe and cope and create rage bait. Now, RFH does create rage bait, but I think she's got a bit higher of an IQ percentage than your average rad femme who has been scorned by experience or by secondhand experience by other, embittered people online. And I think that there's a qualitative difference in that type of posting that RFH does, as opposed to your garden variety rad femme that's posting seething hatred of men at every turn. As there is a quantifiable, it's not quantifiable, it's never quantifiable. There's a qualifiable difference between, say, I mention him on the show a lot, Enzo, and someone else who's like a garden variety incel that's just posting about how he hates women. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be a little bit poetic about your hatred of things. You gotta be a little bit smart, a little bit poetic about things. You gotta have fun. I think RFH has fun. These other ones, they don't have fun. That's the difference. At least I know I'm simping or whatever. But anyways, I'm just saying it's a good post, and this is why I wanted to read it, because I think that she brings up, in spite of the rage and the clickbait and the chiding man, I think that there's a truth, and this is why RFH is so effective, because, even the most virulent misogynist on the E-right can say that, maybe she's getting at a truth, and however distorted that truth is, or however that she purposefully bends that truth to be provocative, to play around, to be a humor account, to create rage bait, like, especially like her spiritual, like, quasi radfem Gnosticism posting is quite interesting. About like that one tweet that went viral about how men are not ensouled when their mothers didn't. How do I say this? When their mothers didn't experience pleasure when they were being conceived. Like, that was like, that's crazy, right? That's a crazy take. I feel like I'm Tucker Carlson. That's crazy, right? But I think, like, if you were to bracket the politics around radical feminism versus the manosphere, whatever, that is kind of like it's a crazy post, but it's got like it's same like when you see a schizo poster that plays around with spiritual concepts, and it's like it's kind of provocative. I think, like, I don't know, maybe it's the art F slur in me, but I think it's very provocative, and it's very, well, Now, do I agree with that take on a theological level? Of course not. That's kind of crazy and out there. But the fact that it is crazy and out there, it's like, come on, you got to see the humor in it. Come on, like, bracket your woman disrespecting for a moment. Okay, like, it's kind of like, that's a crazy take. That's a crazy take. And people took the bait. But I think it's kind of clever, and I don't agree with it theologically, but I think that it is kind of like, it's, okay, the reason I find it so interesting and provocative is because when someone is on brand, when someone has fun with doing their bit, in an artistic sense, that can be very interesting. So that take that RFH did, people took the bait, maybe she doesn't even believe that, but it's really a crystallization of her brand, right? Like a spiritualist, casually racist radfem, you know what I mean? Like, there's something there, like, to say that men that are conceived when their mothers didn't experience any pleasure, don't have souls, like, they're like, can you get a more on-brand tweet for RFH? You can't. Like, she's got this whole thing about women are the real beings of light, like in Gnosticism, Manichaeanism, and that men are sort of like these lowly demiurgic creatures, and it's fascinating, right? But even though I don't agree with it, I think that there's an artistry to what she does, as opposed to a lot of other posters that are just pure seethe and bitter and embitterment and so forth. But anyway, so I know, listen, whatever allegations about her, I know, okay, I don't endorse any actions. I don't necessarily endorse a lot of her opinions. I'm just looking at things objectively. It's not that I'm RFH's biggest simp or whatever. I like to keep things on the level, right? And so I'm not going to comment on any particular drama or any past whatever. But I did see this post and I did feel like I vibed with it. Maybe because she mentioned fat guys, so that's why I probably vibed with it. But anyways, so please bracket your opinion of RFH, bracket whatever you may think of her backstory, whatever. I'm just reading a post that I thought was very interesting. And I think that's something that's neglected. And it seems that nobody can escape the like dating women, men discourse, like nothing. It's like, you people, you have to realize that we're on this earth for a short time, unless you believe in reincarnation, right? So you're going to spend it posting coal, right? Are you going to spend it caring about the opinions of other people? Like there was this recent thing with this woman from the South against this what is she, Pakistani or Lebanese, this like Eurasianist type of like grifter that hangs around the Manosphere, but then this Southern girl that goes catfishing is also a grifter, and it's like, I don't know, anyway, there's a dialectic going on there, but I don't want to comment on, again, Cole, because this is episode 60, I want to keep it high-minded, highly respected, here's your IQ supplement, it's like, yeah, there you go. Anyways, so this post is about the energy of men. So RFH says, for those who don't know, the H is exactly what you think it is, but I can't say it for YouTube, so I'm going to say RFH or, Rad Femme Austrian Painter. But you have to realize, like, I don't know why I find her handle name so funny, Hollow Earth Turf. That's everything, that's like, I can't envision, a more like, oh my God. Like, I don't know, I think it's clever. It's kind of, it's funny to me, I don't know why. Anyways, golden retriever men, goofballs, criminals, and artists. What do they all have in common? Energy, right? I'm a goofball, I'm an artist, I have energy. Men are largely stingy with energy. To them, nothing is really worth doing. Men are largely stingy with energy. To them, nothing is really worth doing. They simply refuse to exist on this plane. I think she meant they simply refuse to do and to exist on this plane. The average human male walks around as if having to breathe is a chore he has been unfairly tasked with. His underdeveloped Y chromosome having left him with a lack of connection to life. This is why they would rather live in filth than lift a finger to pick up after themselves. Why only a man could conceive of something as horrifying as the Goon Cave. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh, I can't even help it. It's too much. It's too much. Why am I reading this? Oh, that's why. It'll get good. Don't worry about it. It'll get good. Most of them teeter on the precipice of sun-setting ideation, with the promise of possible ejaculation being the only thing that holds them back from the edge. You can smell how much a man resents being here, how much he longs for the pre-consciousness slumber of the spiritual womb. And this feature, which most men have due to their poor karma that has resulted in them being born male. So again, if you have poor karma because you're born male, because in another life you had bad karma, that's kind of another on-brand insight by RFH. Oh my God, is the most fundamental thing that women find unattractive in men. Not being bald, not being fat, not being weird, not being poor. So in other words, she's saying that it's not the whole obsession with I can't be bald, I can't be fat, I can't be weird, I can't be poor. She's like, that's of lesser importance in some ways. It is a lack of life force that is so unshakably repulsive to women. It is a glaring flaw in the foundation of your very being that women find so repellent that you would rather expire alone than be tied to you for life if given the choice. Sorry, saying that it's worded kind of funny because again, it's a long post and she probably just thought of this on hand and tweeted it out. She says that what they find so repellent that they would rather expire alone than be tied to you for life if given the choice. That ugly fat guy who's really funny and always has a girlfriend, he simply acts like he's interested in existing. Wow, I agree with that. RFH. I'm your strongest simp. No, I'm kidding. Women are so desperate for a man who will do something that has any semblance of life, of movement in him, that a minority of them will even end up fetishizing criminals. It's all just misdirected longing for something that women know they need in a man, life or life force. Women like assholes and sociopaths. They like energy because life is energy and women are tasked with creating new life. This is why the golden retriever man and the criminal, despite seeming like polar opposites on the surface, will both succeed in dating because they have something more important in common, which is life and energy. They will succeed though with different subsets of women. Those subsets being based on those women's sense for energy, which has been calibrated by their respective environments. Not all energy is created equal. A woman raised in a high adrenaline environment will recognize adrenaline as their primary energy and will be attracted to it in men, criminals, sociopaths, keto enthusiasts. A woman raised in an environment based on subsistence energy, on subtainable energy, that's what she meant. On subtainable energy will recognize the high energy of gregariousness, friendliness, kindness, patience, curiosity, openness, and the love for a sweet little treat in men. I think that's like me. That's literally... No, I can't be too... You realize why I'm reading this thread? Anyways. Women are right to reject your rejection of life. Do something or perish. Is that not incredible? Is that not a great post? Are you not entertained? Even if you don't agree with it, are you not entertained? Come on. You know, I think there's a truth to it, though. There's something that I think is neglected by the red-pilled manosphere and like a lot of the discourse around dating and so forth. Is that when you look at the history of PUA, of pickup artistry, right from the very beginning with Ross Jeffries, because remember, he existed a whole few decades before Mystery. Me and Kathrine interviewed him. And even before him, there was Iceberg Slim, right? Like with the Pimp book. If you look at that history, it's not that it's trying to create a program that can influence people. In some ways, like Mystery, it's sort of like, I hate to say it, it's sort of like being in a cult. Or like, it's not like being in a cult to Mystery. It's like Mystery is creating like a microscopic cult around a particular woman where you're in the club and you have to like isolate them from their friend group and then you have to like do all these steps to do it. What you're doing is you're creating intrigue and energy. And, you know, Ross Jeffries discovered neurolinguistic programming, and it's selling a point where he says, like, I'm going to give you an amazing experience and I really want to intensify your life and so forth and all this stuff. And it's always in the affirmative. But what it's all trying to do, whether it's through looks maxing or through even Mystery, like even someone like, who am I using as an example? I think even someone as practical as, say, my good friend Ryan Stone, or like even Mystery will tell you this, even like Roosh V will tell you this, is that you have to have a personality to begin with if you want to be really good with women. You have to have something. In other words, you have to have the energy for life. You have to have something that makes you intriguing, or at the very least makes you aspirational. And I think like that's probably the reason why women gravitate towards certain men, even men that don't really necessarily fit the mold of like a perfect 10 out of 10 man. Like the guy that's like, you know, jacked and he's got 6 figures, 6 feet, 6 inches, you know the whole thing, right? And I think like that's why a lot of women will go for men that, like, even if they look like gremlins, they still have a sense of life to them. And I think that's what really is attractive to women overall. Now, is it good to looks max? Is it good to go to the gym? Yes. Because it's for your health and you do it for your own physique and your own sense of self and so forth, right? Is it good to make, is it good to have enough of an income to support a family? Yes. But I think that when men become enslaved to certain activities that they think are going to land them a zest for life, to the point where your career, we're going to the gym, or even intellectual pursuits. Academics are full of this. Where you don't have a zest for life, you don't have a verve, you don't have an energy that means that you love what you're doing, you love living it. I've met many academics who have no light between their eyes. I've met a lot of academics who have light between their eyes, but I've met some that they go through the motions, they're basically like bureaucrats, and it's like, what are they doing? Right? Like, why do they care? I remember one time, I think it was on, it's kind of painful for me to mention this because I really hate the guy now because he really I feel like he stabbed me personally in the back, but because of him being a turncoat. But anyways, I remember one time on the Michael Corrin show, this was years ago, what was his name? Was it Christopher Hurd or something? I think it was Christopher Hurd. It was a journalist he had on a panel, and he was recounting a tale where he went to the office of another journalist. I believe he was writing in the Globe and Mail, and he said, like, what's your opinion on something? And he had in the back of him, he had these shelves full of binders, and all of the binders had every article he wrote by topic. And he's like, if I have a topic on something, he would go back to what he wrote, and it was like basically an externalized categorization of his life and thought about any given topic. And he thought like how weird it was, because it's like, can't you be original? Like, can't you not follow the paint by numbers type of outline of what a journalist is? Like, can't you be someone who has a bit of a spirit? Right? Same with academics, right? They get big, or they on one particular thing and they publish it, and then they gain a position, and they'll keep going over the greatest hits. And podcasters do this all the time, by the way. You'll go over the greatest hits, and you've heard it once, you've heard it a million times, because these people, and that's what I really hate. I really hate how a lot of people who get ahead in the attention economy online, they use their fan base for nothing but to push more of the same. Because to them, it's not about ideas, it's not about art, it's not about being a part of any particular community that you're an influencer in or whatever. I hate that word influencer, but you know what I mean. It's really just about being at the top and grinding away, and it's really just a job. You know what I mean? Like, you have to have a great love of things to do anything. And you have to have a purpose. And even when people joke about it, like, I remember one time that the famous interview with Peter Steele on Jerry Springer, God rest his soul. God rest both of their souls. I remember he's like, listen, I don't know why these women throw themselves at me. This is a job for me. I'm here to pay my phone bill. I'm here to pay my rent, right? This is a job. But you know that, like, if you listen to Typo Negative, you know that he was joking. Like, that was his sense of humor. Because he had such a deep, unyielding love for what he did, to the point where it destroyed him. Right? Like, if you look at any of those albums, and he would always joke about, oh, this is just a job. I'm just doing it. Like, who cares? But really, I mean, that music is transcendental. Typo Negative will withstand the test of time. Peter Steele's voice, maybe not so much his bass playing, not sometimes, but maybe not so much his bass playing, but his voice will withstand the test of time. Like, that's a man who loved what he did, even though he joked that he didn't. You know what, you get what I'm trying to say? Because even though he wasn't the most technical singer or the most technical bassist, he wasn't like, who's that guy from Beyond Creation? Like, you know, he wasn't even like Alex Webster, or he wasn't Ryan Martini or whatever. But, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Same with Chuck Schuldiner. Wasn't exactly like John Petrucci or any other brilliant modern guitarist. He wasn't exactly like Michael Keane or John Petrucci or Rusty Cole or whatever. But he knew how to write a song, and he put absolute passion into every single note in every single Death song. right? You can detect it. I know that. So in other words, it's not really about the affectations of things that you are trying to do in the moment. It's more about the energy that you put out there. It's more about actually loving life. You know what I mean? For the longest time, I hated life. I was miserable. I still kind of am, but like, you know what I mean? Like I drudged going through day to day. There were so many times I wasted doing nothing, being alone, being in this room, right? Being in my basement. But I think that when you do find an excuse for life, I remember saying this to someone, and he's like, "But Gio, you did all this stuff, you learned all these skills, and you do it because you find that there's some form of inner necessity to it." And I'm like, yeah, that's true. That's true. But at the same time, you still can't deny that when you could like get up in the morning and you're always in pain and you can barely move and you sort of have this a very like stagnant life and you feel like you're going nowhere and there's no options and you're just sort of existing. You know what I mean? Like I've been there. I've just sort of existed. Right? And still, when you go through that, it still has a pull on who you are. You can never, it takes many years to get over it when you've been in those moments. When you've been through, when you've sort of put your life on pause for a long time. You know what I mean? And I think that those things will stay with you, and your negative self-image, your negative self-talk, that's what the whole cognitive behavior people say about negative self-talk. Like, all of that stays with you. But it's a slow process to get over it. And to be motivated to get over it. Because you start something and you stop and you can't do it. And the pain of confronting what you're doing and how you truly feel about yourself. And the pain of thinking that there's no options in life. And, I'm still not there. You know what I mean? Like, there's still a lot of parts of my life that are a bit uncertain, as everyone is, right? There's still a lot of things that you find out about yourself. You know what I mean? It's really, it never truly goes away. But I guess the point being is that if you're a man especially, if you find a reason to exist, and if you find that light between your eyes, and if you find a way to capitalize on your strengths, then that's the best you can do. But in the interest of fairness, there is a critical reply to this exact long post from RFH that a follower of mine redirected me to when I said I was going to mention the thread on show. It's from this account, Crystal, and the handle is Crystal, like, the crystal, X Duan, D-U-A-N, Crystal X Duan. The very men who, quote, "The very men who read this post and try to do something are likely going to walk into an unsupportive environment that will humiliate them. The average human male actually walks around afraid that at any minute he's going to be reprimanded and shamed at every turn for doing the bare minimum to where his life force has been completely belittled, demolished, diminished, and then he has to repress any joie de vivre he had. Women aren't solely to blame here, though. Your toxic guy friends many of you try to model your lives after probably are also contributing too. The only type of satisfaction such, quote, weak men thinks will give him joy is the physical orgasm, because that's why he was conditioned to believe will redeem him, when really he is seeking to be able to feel alive and well and connected to forces that be. This post is unkind because while it's correct in the perception of this phenomenon, don't be deceived by how it falls deathly short of actually prescribing any understanding of the causal extension. Then it goes on to say, you can smell how much man resents being here, how much he longs for the pre-consciousness slumber of the spirit womb. Yes, because back then he experienced a mother's unconditional love. And now he has to walk around with no good male role models to validate his plight because his brothers are also busy chasing tail and his mother is probably too busy not understanding him, or worse, coddling him and not giving him the fatherly guidance he yearns for. If I were a man, I'd feel the same way. Does OP think, meaning RFH, high energy of gregariousness, friendliness, kindness, patience, curiosity, openness is purely natural, not nurture? Does she think a man's inability to possess such qualities is purely just because he didn't work hard enough? The name of the game is merit-based, yes, but of course women shouldn't have to settle for some person who adds no value to their life. But this type of expletive slaps of a post isn't tempered with any grounded nuance of what exactly our society and culture are doing to completely neuter this type of zest, and not actually optimizing for creating tribes of strong men that want their brothers and sons to do well. I don't know, man. I don't know. Like, I disagree in the extent. I agree with a lot of this. I disagree in the sense that you're expecting nuance from RFH. You're not going to expect nuance from RFH. I was going to suggest something along the lines of men who are indeed possessing of their proverbial non-toxic joie de vivre start doing their part to listen, direct, and help their guy friends. But this might be a woman's solution to what is still a man's problem. Unfortunately, I, like many people, I'm still arguing over what frame to interpret this through. At the end of the day, RFH does point out something worthy of his observation and pay attention to still, to feel emotionally validated, and not facing the reality that you're still going to be stuck with this issue at the end of the day. My only really flimsy idea right now is more men should do some volunteer work and mentor young boys or something like that. You mentioned his expletive, whatever. I have no clue what else could be it, but I will continue talking to my male friends about this until I figure it out. Now, I think that is a good that is a good criticism. I do think that that's a very good criticism. That RFH, I think, is for polemical reasons not getting at the substantial, or gets at the substantial issue, but does it in a way that's provocative and polemical, and again, sort of kind of places the blame at the hands of men. And I think that there's a vast number of reasons why there's a vast number of reasons as to why a lot of men don't possess a yearning for life. And I think that there should be the consideration of the greater social apparatus that a lot of men face. And all of those qualities are something that is either learned the hard way or is taught to you. And I mean, people have said to me that I have certain qualities. I've had to sort of work for them, but at the same time, they in part came a little bit naturally because I was much different when I was a little kid. I was I was kind of a bad kid in some ways, in the sense that, I was rambunctious and I didn't listen and I was sort of like caught in my own little world. And, so I think that you can never really know the perception that people have of you unless you actually talk to them. And even still, like, sometimes they're doing things to spare your feelings or so forth. But I do think that in some ways it is natural, but in other ways there's certain things that you need to be taught. That even experience can help you, but experience can only go a certain way. Experience can get you so far. You need someone to actually demonstrate it to you. So in a sense, Crystal is very correct that you need to create social conditions that foster these type of men who are kind and gregarious, yet determined, that are not pushovers, but can tolerate a form of self-levity. Because I think that's also another quality that a lot of people, unfortunately, don't possess. And it's something that comes with experience. It's something that you can't really... A lot of people become, as they say in wrestling, marks for themselves. And a lot of people can't stave off, especially because if you're existing in an online realm where your image and your face is everything, and you have to, like, push back at people, you have to get above them, you have to sort of have the best take, have to be perceived as being better than others and so forth in any given milieu or community. There's no room for a lot of touchy-feely, like, listen, we're all in this together, we're all under siege, we're all doing this together. And so there's not a lot of room for being understanding towards each other. And so therefore a lot of the balance between having a bit of levity about yourself and being able to take a joke versus being belittled all the time, using self-deprecation as a sort of defense mechanism, something I know very well, by the way. There's always a fine balance, but you can't strike that balance because a lot of people either are expected to be a pincushion or a punching bag, or the opposite, which is equally, if not more, scary and unproductive for really being the best you can be, which is to be like a total self-serious, like, I'm serious, I'm the serious hat about myself all the time, and how dare you make fun of me. Like, people like that, I don't like. I do not get along with them. People that are like marks of themselves, to where they can't take a joke, they'll fly off the handle at the slightest provocation, or at the slightest little comment, or anything that like is perceived as being a joke about themselves, like they hate it. And something goes off in their brain where their like lizard animalian brain takes over and they have to attack. Like, I hate people like that. You know what I mean? Like, you gotta learn to not be as serious about yourself, because you have to realize that a lot of people, they have a lot of different motivations as to why they're doing something. And sometimes there's something that Matthew said to me recently, something that I find very profound, in that he said, sometimes the greatest task, I know this is the Anthony Robbins portion of the show, but I guess we can leave off. There's going to be more serious philosophy in the paywalled version. I think I'm going to leave the New Metal article for a standalone video or for another solo episode, because we're approaching almost two hours and 2 hours and a half. So, and frankly, I want to devote a lot of time to explaining the concepts in the paywalled version with human evolution, accelerationism, and capitalism that Nick Land has laid out. And I'm approaching the end here. So this is the Anthony Robbins portion of the show. He said that sometimes, this is what Matthew says, sometimes the greatest task and the most arduous and the most, sometimes the most rewarding, but the most arduous and the hardest task is to actually ignore your enemies, is to actually ignore the slights. To ignore your enemies is in some ways even greater of a task, even harder than going to war with them all the time. I've learned this lesson the hard way. I still mention some of my enemies. I have a few. Thank God it's only a few. But it's hard. It's hard to really forget your enemies. The forgetfulness. It's like what Nietzsche said about the man who is unburdened by resentment, by ressentiment, is the man who can also have the ability to forget, who can forget petty slights, can forget jokes about him by other people, can forget about being belittled in his station in life. The man of supreme forgetfulness in some ways is an overman, according to Nietzsche. To forget your enemies, to ignore them, that sometimes is harder. That is the sign of a man in life, or even a woman in life, who can go through life with a zest and a sort of zeal and an ability to move on and to embrace the good parts of life and existence, than harping on those previous battles, those previous enemies. And that's a very incredibly difficult thing to do. I know this for a fact. When you see your enemies succeed, especially. You know what I mean? Like, if it was like everybody, I am no different. I am a flawed human being. If it were up to me, then my enemies would be nothing. They would be in the ground. They would be in the gutter. You know, I know it's difficult to admit, but it's true. When you see your enemies succeed in life, it's difficult. Now, thankfully, there's only a few of them that have kind of succeeded, but, you know, most of them, some of my enemies have just spiraled out of control, but whatever, who cares? The point being is that to forget about them, to ignore them, sometimes that is really the better, the more rewarding, but yet the more difficult task. And I think that if you have this ability, then barring certain circumstances where you have to monitor what your enemies are doing for a variety of reasons, apart from that, I think if you can master that, then you can be more productive and you can learn to let go. And you can learn to focus on what really matters in life. You know what I mean? Like, you can focus on other things, because when you're... This is the problem. When your enemies will want to bog you down in a form of psychic entrapment, to invest all of your life energy into going after them. That's what they want. To ignore them and to not pay them a form of spiritual and psychic energy is the greater victory than the lesser victory of vanquishing over your enemies. The greater victory is to overcome them. And to sometimes, and even Nietzsche says this, sometimes to overcome is to forget. So I'll leave you with that. Please join me for the paywalled version. And it's gonna be great. I'm gonna talk about human evolution, that part from the movie Waking Life, which is a really great animation film. And before I go to the paywalled version, I want to promote my good friend. He just came out with a collection of short stories and poems. It's short, but it's, I think it's pretty reasonable, especially to support our guys. A lot of this stuff is great. I might actually read some poems on the YouTube shorts. But my good friend Columba, his real name is Colum Killy. I like that name, Killy. And he's come up with and Matthew actually did the cover art for this. It's called Spolia, Poems and Short Stories. You can find it on Amazon. Go to @Columba_1 on Twitter. And of course, the link is in his pinned tweet. Or you can search Column, so COLM, Killy, KILLE. And the book is entitled Spolia, SPOLIA. Go on, please buy it on Amazon. It's a lot of great poems. It's great short stories. And he just came out with it, self-published, and I really like it. I need to, I have a need to promote my friends, and it's really, I think, a lot of quality writing. And some of them are quite funny. Some, like this one's called Looks Maxing. One of them is about oh man, some of them are funny. Some of them are very funny. But anyways, please go and support Columba, and please join me in the paywalled version for a lot of more exciting, more contemporary theory solve type of stuff. I just wanted to ditch the stock outro for this episode and say that it's a sort of a goal. It's a milestone that we've gotten to 60 episodes. And I really wish that you would support me as I'm editing the book, and it's been taking a lot of my time and resources, and hopefully it'll pay off. Me and Matthew are working almost every day to edit the book. And I really appreciate if you were to go on patreon.com or on Substack and give whatever you can. And for all the people expecting, whether who did subscribe to me or who are going to, I'm in the process of getting the other prints for woodcuts that I've done from the FU1 No GF series, and I'm actually contemplating doing a subscription model type of thing, maybe with text and images, periodically, maybe once every 2 months or so, in the $20 and $50 tiers. I'll send new woodcuts out to people, along with mini essays that I think I could release exclusively to people that subscribe. I'm really contemplating a subscription model. I know Owen Cyclops does it, but I really appreciate your support. And please go to the Patreon or in Substack version, the paid version. I really put my effort into trying to explain a lot of different concepts from Nick Land and Deleuze and Guattari in relation to human evolution, capital, artificial intelligence, and the concept of the body without organs, and a lot of different ideas that I really try to hammer home. And I really do appreciate everyone's support. So please join me in the paywalled version. As I always say, God bless, goodbye, too sweet. I'll see you over there.